What happens is that what's unconscious, what's held in the body from the past and is organizing your reactions or your projections, that's what gets included. That's what gets named.
Leah, thank you for coming in to talk to me today so we can empower our listeners on something that I just learned about that I wish I had known about 20 years ago or even 30 years ago. Please, can you tell us more about your background that's led you to know all these amazing things?
Well, I also found family constellation work kind of late in life, but it impacted me and my husband, right, so powerfully, and it really changed the trajectory, right, of our relationship with each other, our son, the quality of our life, et cetera. And we worked with a man named Mark Wallin, and we did a workshop with him, and he's great. And now he's a very well-known author of It Didn't Start With You, how inherited trauma shapes who we are and how to stop the cycle. So Bruce and I decided to train with him because our son was getting older and we wanted to do something together that we thought, had a positive impact on the world. So we got trained with Mark together.
Sure. So, the word trauma is so scary right off the bat. Let's just address it. Let's try to detensify that word because it conjures up all kinds of meanings, but it can look very mild. It can be something so minimal that we perceive as a trauma, and this idea of generational trauma that sets us up to make interesting choices, to feel inadequate, to have these belief systems that don't serve us at all. So trauma doesn't always mean like sexual abuse or whatever. Can you elaborate on that some?
Yeah. I mean, you can call it developmental trauma, but really trauma is anything that the system can't digest while it's occurring.
Where we sort of dissociate a little bit for our
or
protection?
That's something that can't be named and digested in the system, in the field, right? So if your mother can't see your distress,
or she for whatever reason can't consolidate her child at that time, it's like the person going through it is not sure how to integrate.
Yes, then the child is holding that, not seen in it. There's no co-regulation there. So those kinds of patterns build up, right? So, we talk about imprints. So let's say I'm exuberant, but my mother had a mother who was very strict because she lost her mother and was, treats her daughter the way she had to be treated, like a little grown up. And so now we have a mother who can't meet exuberance. And then the impact is like, oh, what's wrong with me? Or I'm not okay, right? Those kinds of dynamics, and then how a child creates thoughts around that, and then beliefs, and then behavior patterns to try to be okay but still be themselves, right? That's the difficulty.
And if my work is about helping women recover lost fertile confidence, to embody the spirit of a mother, your work, you call it embodiment, right? Integrative work. So it's so important that the woman who finds herself on this journey, or the couple, to start from a place of wholeness, like the feeling I felt after having a session with you recently.
Yes.
Is such a logical starting point.
Yes, because I helped you come into a healthier dynamic with your parents.
Right.
Because it's the unconscious dynamics that get set up from behind us that then we're unconsciously creating in our present with our partners and our children.
Right.
So,
which when you tried explaining that to me, I had to experience it firsthand to have any clue what you were talking about. But for the listeners, let's try to set the stage. Family constellation work. So you were intrigued because it sounded like a missing piece within the context of the psychological tools and your training?
Well, when I was first introduced in 2006, I just got I got an email from a friend who said her friend had done this amazing work and there was a facilitator coming to her house on a certain day, right? And I just got this big ping, but when I read about it, it didn't really make sense to me.
Uh-huh.
So,
I had heard the same, like family constellations. I thought, okay, that sounds like we're going to be talking about how the family is put together. And indeed, that is true. And I am very suggestible. I have had a lot of hypnosis. I've done a lot of grief recovery work. I've done a lot of meditation. So I can check out mentally very easily. And I was just like a beginner's mind curious of what you were doing. So when we met, I just kind of trusted you and thought, well, both of my parents are now deceased, and maybe now would be a good time to look at this. But also, my personal relationship is over, and then I have the kid's dad. So my story is very unconventional, and we'll get into it through the episode. But I know that I'm working on a better future. And I want to set a good example for my kids. So, in the context of family constellation work, I thought you were going to start it with like me and the kid's father and the kid's stepfather, and that we were going to work backwards. But instead, why don't you tell me what you did with me on Wednesday? And we did it through Zoom, which was fascinating.
yeah. And it wasn't mental. It was visceral. In the family constellation process, you're following the body, and
Tell
you
me
have
more.
to keep.
Tell me more.
Even when I was working with you, right? You would have a memory. You'd try to think about something. You would try to make sense of it. I'm like, no. We're only including what you're noticing physically in your body in this position right now, because a family constellation is set up with an intention, which is like what kind of the GPS, right? What focuses and organizes the information, because we're using the field. And when you make that intention to sort of use the greater field of intelligence and you only follow the body, what happens is that what's unconscious, what's held in the body from the past, but hasn't been included, hasn't been named, and is organizing your reactions or your projections, that's what gets included. That's what gets named.
Would you say that's what gets integrated and embodied, taken in for wholeness?
Yes, because what you can name and include, you can be with. And that starts a metabolism, a digestion and integration process. And when then we separated you from how you were with your parents because of how they were. It wasn't what you wanted and needed as a child. It's just what happened. But what happened had to do with how they were traumatized in their growing up because of what happened to their parents. So in the family constellation, there's never anything wrong. There's just what happened, and really seeing the inclusion. Like when you stood as your mother and you could feel, that excruciating dynamic in your body, which was where she was stuck with her parents, you understood her mental illness.
Yes.
And it had nothing to do with you, and it had nothing to do with anything being wrong with her. And when you have that sort of perspective, you can be with it in a different way.
Right.
And in this work, we say it's not what happened, it's how you hold it. And this work is around shifting how you hold it, right? Being appreciative of how amazing your mother really was, given what she was carrying unconsciously.
Right. So I'm going to go back just a little bit because I'm not sure how much of family constellations my listeners will know about if I didn't really understand. Somebody had told me, it's like role play, but it was so much more. And as you just mentioned, the field, right? The universal field, the consciousness, that's the as Wayne Dyer would say, it's what grows our fingernails, or what makes the grass grow. It's invisible, but something is doing these things. So the alignment of energy in the field allowed me, because I felt safe. I mean, what do I have to lose? I have my 2 children. I'm in the present moment. I'm kind of setting an intention for how I would like my future to flow better and be less traumatizing and less stressful. And so why not? I'm going to interview you. I didn't really have a high expectation. I was just intrigued and I was curious, thought it could help. I'm sure it can't hurt. So you had me answer some questions before we Zoomed.
Well, it's a pretty extensive questionnaire. Before I even see you, I have like a traumagram picture. Like I have this bigger picture. And sometimes I can see, right, someone loses a parent or loses a child young. That always has a much bigger impact than people realize. So, there are, very common dynamics that flow.
It wasn't very many questions, I felt. I mean, my intake form is like 6 pages long.
All right.
So by comparison, it was about a dozen questions, but they were so specific, such that when I returned the answers to you, I was already feeling the integration, feeling a different understanding of what has unfolded to be my life.
Yeah, the big picture perspective is already showing up and the patterns from that.
Yeah,
yes.
And I was like, oh, no wonder. Do you think that the majority of your clients would say that those questions kind of pushed the dominoes for them and they were already underway?
I think once you schedule the session, it's already starting. And then when you fill that out, right, you're getting more present to your own experience, and that really prepares you, and that information really prepares us to work with you. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it sure did. And then, so I had answered those questions. So, in traditional therapy, there's so many sessions that go by as you're reliving and telling and setting the stage. That's why I have had the same therapist for 26 years, right? Because I don't want to take that and give it to anybody new. I want to stay in the present moment. I don't want to keep massaging the same old stories. And so to have you so succinctly ask these questions for me to answer them and hand it over and then show up for a Zoom. So we talked just quickly, and then you said, okay, find some objects. And I was like, okay, now this is the Zoom I've never done. Where are you going to lead me? So please elaborate on how that works.
The basic intention is that once we start the process, and I ask you to choose 4 things, right? An object for young you, an object for your mother, an object for your father. And then I had you have like a scarf or a bathrobe belt or something nearby in case we needed to use it. These are, they're what we call representing. And then I had you use those objects to show me how it was. And that picture shows me, right?
So I was thinking, oh, should I get something that's like a picture of little me or something? And you were like, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Anything. But
you're taking something that's actually inside you that's always been there, so it's never been differentiated. And by making that picture, you're putting it outside of you.
Right. And I didn't overthink it. I just was kind of like intuitively led. I got that mug with my initial on it, and then a soft pillow from my mom, a necklace of beads from my dad, but then for my grandmother, a pair of scissors, and my grandfather, this beautiful crystal. Now, I didn't have any preparation time. I just grabbed things, but the pair of scissors for that particular person in the family story was very interesting.
Yes, and it was perfect. And when you're in the field that way, there's right. That's just what happens.
Right. I was in the moment. I was trusting.
I wouldn't let you go into your head. There were a couple of times, right? And I'm like, no, we're only interested in what you're noticing right now,
Yeah.
emotionally or sensation wise in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like I know something's happened to your mom.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we have history
Yeah.
and their
We're
facts and
humans and
events.
we're working things out.
Sometimes it shows up in where the objects are, and then when you stand in, you feel how excruciating or bad it felt. And you can feel how everyone ideally, everyone's mother and father, right, are integrated in them because we are an integration of them.
Yeah.
And so this process is really about bringing the client back into not just a healthy relationship, but the right order,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there's an order in the intelligence and health that's flowing invisibly in everything. And that order needs to be honored and aligned with.
Mm-hmm.
And what's out of place or out of alignment gets named when you are standing and just noticing what happens with your body.
Yeah, that is exactly what happened. I couldn't have understood until I experienced it.
Yeah.
Honestly. And I have so many questions I want to come back to. Well, first, I want to lay it out more to give the listener an appreciation for the experience.
How have you felt since?
I have felt really at peace. Is that common for your clients?
Yes. Because one, you're finally in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
When you made the first picture,
Mm-hmm.
you were next to your parents, right? Which means you're on the same line as them. So I know there's out of order.
But I had no idea. So
know.
We don't want to spoil it for future clients. But yes, I laid those items out in a way that made sense to me of this is Danica and this is her mom and dad.
Yeah.
And that's what you told me to do. And
it made sense to your body.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I just said, how is it? Right? You'd never done that before. So you can only come from your body.
Right. I felt like it made sense logically, intellectually. Like I'm individuated. I'm a whole person already. I feel like I'm an adult now. I'm 53 years old. They are deceased, but like I'm an adult. I have 2 children. So we should be as equals.
I just want to point out, because this is, again, what you notice all the time. I asked you to have young you and show me how it was. But this tells me, do you see, but that's what you had to do when you were young.
Yeah, and because it's still true. I was raising my parents.
This
as
deeper
a kid.
Truth just shows up in the picture. And again, nothing wrong, just I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So now, and I also can see in the configuration that you put out, right, the issue was partnership. But here you are in this image, you have your mother in the partner position.
Yeah, which means...
Right, which has an impact.
Right. It's
people don't understand this.
Until they go into it. So I had mentioned to some friends, I'm going to do Family Constellations work. And they said, oh, it's like role play. Who else is going to be in the room with you? So is that pre-COVID and the quarantine Zoom version of Family Constellations?
Well, in some ways, yes. The work was developed by a man named Bert Hellinger, who, as a young Jesuit priest, lived for like 14 years with the Zulus in South Africa, converting them to Christianity. But of course, he gets converted by the health of this indigenous community, right? The order, the health, the belonging,
like a tribal...
the trauma. Yeah, the traumas don't get repeated.
Oh.
They get completed, right?
By
the whole family or the whole community, and everyone knows everyone's story. And so he came back and he studied with, in all the psychology, but he started this idea that to align with this greater health, this greater invisible movement of divine life force or mystery or nature, universe. I really don't care what words you use for it. But to align with it, just like we need to align for mind-body health, You need to align with it for family system health, because that is how life is moving forward, right? So there, you have to be in the right place and you have to belong in the right way. Like daughters can't be giving to mothers emotionally. You see, that's like swimming upstream, but it happens all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have a place, there's an order, there's a place, and there's the proper flow of belonging, right? It's really simple.
Yeah.
And when he developed it and how I learned it was in a group setting.
Okay.
So instead of having the client choose objects, you look around the circle and you choose a person. And the beauty of that, and Bruce and I do group works, we have one on April 21st, is that you always get chosen for the right thing for you. So
that's what
even
my friend
though
said. She
you're
said
a representative.
she said she stood in as like an aunt, but that she got the healing that she needed.
It's just amazing, right? When you really are letting the field organize this. But all I do, you just you say choose someone, and the client chooses. They don't know the people, right? And it's a powerful, beautiful experience to represent. Same, you represented for your mother, so you got the experience, but you could, that same thing would happen if you were in a group and someone chose you to represent their mother. You wouldn't know that person from Adam, but in that moment, in that field, in service to her healing, the information that's important just shows up through the body.
Right. I was blown away. So we put me into didn't you start me with being young Danica?
Yes. I had you make the picture, and then I just had you stand where you put yourself, and then not at all orient to your thoughts and memories and, blah, blah about stuff. It's not, you leave the psychology.
Yeah. Right. And I did feel like my young self. And then you put me into the position of my mother, and I don't know how it happened. And I'm a very spiritual person, but it was effortless to be able to feel how she would have felt.
Yeah.
And that helped me to understand why she made certain decisions that she did. So,
and you understand that, right? We're all being organized. Our consciousness, our beingness is being organized by our thoughts. And our thoughts are often organized, or our ways of being, behavior patterns are often organized by what we can't figure out or can't be with, or would have been overwhelming for us as children.
I think that's inherently the definition of being dysregulated.
Right? So there you are in this picture with your walls and your lane, right? And you developed that because of the way your mother was. And she was the way she was because of the way she grew up in the dynamic of her parents, which was so...
And then you had me, we'll just jump ahead, when I was in the position of my maternal grandfather. Who knew that was where this was all coming from? I could not have intellectually got there.
Well, and it wasn't just him. It was both. It's never just one part of a couple.
I think because that was a new information.
Yes.
Right? My upbringing was my mom telling me that her mother had been verbally and physically abusive. So I had that intellectual piece. I'd never really considered how her father, my grandfather, and that whole dynamic, and how that must have felt to be him and what he was dealing with.
Yeah. And then what it felt like to be his wife, right? And never, right? I mean, that's one of the things that often works out, happens the other way, right? Couples come together, right, looking at each other, and they make children, but they still need to put each other first and the children second. When, right, one or both, right, turn and make the children more important, it's not good for the child, and it certainly isn't good for the relationship. Often what happens is mom then becomes in an emotional relationship with child, and father feels just not looked at anymore, not seen, and he drinks, he gets angry, he doesn't just, and people just make him the bad guy, and then that whole pattern just repeats.
Which is exactly why I wanted to have you on here, because fertility kind of mimics that. She's doing all the work. She's taking all the injections. She's doing all the appointments. She's the one having all the emotionality on the surface that we can see how it affects her. And he, similarly traumatizing, is that he's put in a powerless role where he can't really help. He can't take the pain. He can't take the pain for her. All he can do is show up for the appointments and be a sounding board, listening, supporting, maybe mixing the shots and give a specimen when needed. And that's not the divine the divine masculine role at all.
No, but also you're talking about the things that couples have to actually deal with in the process. But what this work is, how they're dealing with those things has everything to do with
what's got them there in the first place.
How they were raised by their parents. What happened in that dynamic? That's where you doing your work with your parents is the gift you give, because what gets completed doesn't repeat. What gets seen, you were impacted by what happened to you as a child, but when you're not holding it the way you were, the way you
unknowingly
hold it now,
holding it,
right, unconsciously,
right.
That's why you feel at peace. I can do my own work. I'm okay. I actually am supported by my parents, right? In the eternal alignment of life, your life still came from your parents. So coming into an authentically in your body good place with them, because you understand now, and it wasn't personal, and it wasn't at you, and it wasn't that you didn't matter to them. It was that they were so consumed with what was incomplete from behind them that they couldn't flow that love forward. And it changes everything.
It sure does. It really does. I was so impressed. I can't tell you. I do a lot of different things, and I've seen a lot of stuff be pivotal for people, but this is something.
Well, so I want to add that I gave you homework, right? The way I look at it is a family constellation is like a constitutional homeopathic.
Right. Meaning?
You take one dose, right? Because in a constellation, we started with the first image, configuration of objects.
Meaning me and my parents and grandparents.
Well, yes, the way you put your parents, you right next to your parents. That's where we started. That was right. And then where you ended was in a very different place. And in that new place that felt right to your body now, you could feel, the access to resource, to life flow, to, feeling your own feeling.
Invisible support.
And people will feel it in different ways depending upon, what had happened. But that then is your new conscious inner image. And then the homework is always for you to practice reinforcing that. So that place, that somatic residing in relationship to life directly with your parents supporting you becomes your default, operating mode. Flow.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you could see how life couldn't flow like that when you were still unconsciously caught in that other place somewhere.
Out of alignment.
Yeah.
Out of order.
Out of
Disordered.
order. Out of alignment. Yeah. And when you come back in, it's amazing how different it feels. And then it's your job to cultivate that. And then I also, with your therapist, you'll be talking about it. I also do somatic work with people, because helping them really understand how to more deeply somatically orient to the flow of their own health, the flow of life, and use it to then allow the held emotional material, from stuff that happened that is still incomplete. It's way easier to complete that stuff.
So could you give an example, like a case example?
I can talk about myself.
Okay.
How about that?
Okay.
Because the reason we met, is that I went to Dr. Nee
We were at a fertility
Yes.
gala recently where they were honoring Dr. Mars.
Yes.
And you
I
shared
had
your
gone
work with
through-
Dao Xing Ni,
Yeah.
my teacher.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Just, he's like sunshine, that man. And I had done Western medicine, no success
For fertility.
for fertility, split up.
Your marriage.
Yes. Remarried.
Mm-hmm.
I had been meditating for the father.
Calling in the one.
Yep. I'm that's the relationship that I wanted. Right. And, met Bruce. We got married in like 3 months, and
Wow.
yeah, it was kind of crazy. And I can't remember who recommended
Dr. Dao?
Dr. Dao and but anyway, I went, and within months, getting that kind of holistic support, and clearly the right partner. And I've been doing a lot of my own work, right, to heal my relationship with my mother.
So you were doing the Family Constellations
No,
work?
I didn't. I had not
You
started
hadn't
the Family
been
Constellation
introduced
work.
to it.
I hadn't,
right?
but
But
I had
you were
been
doing personal discovery
I
work.
was doing a lot of, personal work, and this really helped. And we had our son, but I'll give you an example. So after, like, in the first week, 2 weeks of Mac's birth, our son's Mac, I had PTSD. I would be holding him so happy.
Mm-hmm.
And then in front of my wide awake eyes, I would have this horrible vision of just like losing him in water, or some big, huge force or wind coming by. And I would be shaking. I would be crying. I was just like, oh my God, this is real PTSD.
And postpartum.
I wasn't depressed at all.
Uh-huh.
I just had these flashes of PTSD, and that started me. I mean, I had to use all of my yoga, spiritual tools to just help myself regulate. But I think it opened the door for, like, what is this bigger thing that's happening? And I put it together later in that I found out my mother was the way she was, which really wasn't looking at me, because she had an older sister who died the day she was born. And it was so painful that my her parents, my grandparents, didn't talk about her. And in systemic work, that is called an exclusion. And no life can be excluded, because life is precious and belongs where it expressed, regardless of lifespan, 3 months, 3 years. And so my mother was unconsciously, in this work we call it an unconscious identification, was unconsciously identified with this older sister that she didn't even know she had. She always felt like the black sheep. She always felt she wasn't seen. She didn't feel as good as her siblings. And when we did the constellation work, right, it was with representatives, but the representative for my mother could not look away from the ground, no matter what the rep for me did, trying to get her attention. And then when I had heard, now I had done more digging, and my mother didn't even know she had this older sister until she had her own kids.
Then the grandmother told her?
Her older sister, a friend of the family. So then I realized my mother's been right in this dynamic because her parents wouldn't look, right? Just didn't want to feel it. And that exclusion, you see, like in the flow of life, it just creates a big blockage, like an eddy. And then my mother is caught in that eddy and can't flow to me.
Wow. And
And then I find out that my grandmother's mother, my great-grandmother, also lost her first child. So, and my mother's first child came early and was in an incubator. So now I finally have my first child, but it triggers this fear in the system that's still unexpressed, and I have PTSD.
And kind of unexplained too.
Right, but that's the kind of thing that can happen. Sometimes it's sort of not developmental. There can be an event that triggers
the rippling
something,
effect, the memory
the expression, because in the work we say children express what's unexpressed in the system. So the emotion that hasn't been digested, that doesn't even belong to you, will just well up.
I remember being pregnant with Kira and feeling kind of mad at the universe that it set it up in this way where I would have this really unconventional situation where I effortlessly conceived after 6 years of being told I would be so infertile, I'd never be a candidate for IVF. I would only become a mom with somebody else's eggs. So to be told that for 6 years, but to simultaneously work on myself and work through it. And then the universe offered this little voice. I'm Kira Connors and I'm coming to you. The last name of an ex-boyfriend and a relationship that was not healthy. It was so hard for me to say yes to that, such that when I was pregnant with Kira, I definitely had some anger. And I felt sad that I was going to be exposing that to Kira through her gestation time. But we had a spell of time with her working through some anger, and we helped her with some EMDR. But I can't wait till you kind of help me move forward through the constellation where I can
But let's
help
look
her.
at who else was angry.
I'm sure
Your
Dan.
mother.
Oh, well,
Your
my
mother.
mom was angry about her situation too. Yeah.
And who else was angry?
Her mother.
Yes.
The scissors.
All around, right? All around the children.
Yeah.
Or that being pregnant and the husband not being there.
The husband not being there, not seeing her.
So you just expressed, you just repeated in your own way.
It's almost funny.
Well, when you start to see it this way, it does get simpler. It's like, oh, there's nothing wrong. There's just like, we got to be with what happened in a way that can allow it to just be felt and complete, and not what you resist will repeat. That's just what you exclude.
That's
doesn't
a
go
universal
away.
law.
Yes. So let's align ourselves and our flow of love, right?
Yeah. In my unfolding, where would you take me next as we looked at these things in the back to get everybody in order behind me, supporting me? What is the next layer of the constellation?
So, I integrate somatic, constellation work and somatic work. When I didn't really know exactly what we were, I knew you wanted to just experience it and it was me and I was interviewing. But often people contact us and they know they want a constellation, and Bruce and I facilitate together, and groups we facilitate together. But then I also have individual clients. Sometimes I don't know what I'm going to do with them because whatever's going on with them. So we did that constellation exercise. Next for you, right, would be I would meet with you and really, again, what's going on in your body? What's been occurring since you've been doing the homework and using this image? We didn't really deal with your father's side, but that was secondary, especially for your issue. And I could tell right away this was about mom, right? And in systemic work, often oldest daughter is the one most entangled with the incomplete material of mom.
Yeah.
And oldest son is more entangled with the incomplete material of dad. That's right. That's the general rule. There are always exceptions. Then obviously if they're two daughters, but you start to see that, right? Each child is sort of expressing a different layer of incomplete material often. So for you, I'd love it if you come, I'd get you on my table. We do some deeper somatic work, support the sort of completion of stuff that you had to hold and compress as a young person in order to be strong and bigger than you were when your mother couldn't be there for you.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking right now, I'm getting a loud intuitive hit that this might be unfolding to get me an answer of what is held in my left lower quadrant, where that left ovary is, and how it had 200 endometriosis adhesions on it. And I have a friend with mother issues who similarly has left lower quadrant.
And it can be very helpful for unwinding that kind of material, especially now that you're in this healthy place and in the flow of life, and you're not
Mhm.
holding anything against your mother or feeling unconsciously still protecting yourself
Mhm.
from her
Yeah.
material and issues.
Right.
And so, yes, that, or at some point, I mean, like, oh, let's do the constellations with an exercise with your father, or
Okay.
revisit with your mother. So sometimes, you know what I mean? The constellation work is so great for helping people really get present in their bodies to what's unconscious,
Mhm.
but that shows up when
Mhm.
you put, here, I'm going to put footprints down in front of you. Here's mom.
Mm.
What do you feel?
Mm.
You know what I mean? Right away, the intelligence is taking you to the layer that's ready to be seen and included, right? So that it can open to greater flow.
Wow, Leah. So fascinating. It just opens up some new questions, but anchors some old information. And it really sets the tone for the fertility cases as they are learning how to be the healthiest version of themselves. I've mentioned on other episodes talking about how the work that I had done got me to a place where I felt prepared enough spiritually and physically to bring a baby into the world. And like the next day, I heard from Dan, and then like 6 weeks later, we were pregnant with Kira. But I know like some people may hear that and think that I got lucky or something, but it really was doing the work, sitting in a very uncomfortable space because I'm only just now knowing about this family constellation stuff.
Yeah.
But I love when there's something that comes along that can really fast track it and involve the field and promote consciousness. The idea
Yes.
for people that are just kind of waking up to have this awareness of a bigger intelligence, that's really huge. As my patients, they now have been really conditioned to believe that they are lab results, they are egg counts, they are poor outcomes, they are a sad story, they are using third party as like a constellation, consolation prize.
Yeah.
And when they can see the context of the bigger picture, so that's where I guide them now. Like, okay, yes, I understand you've had 18 failed IVFs, or I understand you've had one hurdle after another, but we don't want to keep thinking about how it didn't work. We want to be focusing on what you want to achieve. So like how you set the intention to meet someone that had what Bruce brought to the table that included your son and a healthy way of relating. I tell my patients to think from that image. What is the goal? Do you
Yeah.
really care about how many normals you get, or do you really care about maybe pushing a stroller or sitting at a cafe with your two kids? Like, what do
Yes.
you want?
Often we feel, even whether it's infertility or whatever the issue, that it's your problem. Like, I thought it was my problem.
Something you created, so you were
Yeah, like
blaming
something
yourself.
wrong with me. Like,
Uh-huh.
okay, and you stay in this very present, but we are all an expression of a bigger system. We all are.
Mhm.
We're all being impacted by the environment, but the deepest, right? The deepest are through the family.
Mhm.
And how that I'm an expression of this bigger system opened me out of my own little box where it was kind of a round room. No matter how much work I did, I was
Yeah.
still ending up in the same place
Mhm.
emotionally.
Mhm.
And when that door, when it was sort of like, oh, because that's the way I'm thinking about it. When you open up
Mhm.
and start thinking like, oh, how is this an expression of something unconscious or something that's still incomplete in the system, and a way that I'm loving
Mhm.
my system,
Mhm.
even though I'm perpetuating some level of suffering. Often Bert Hellinger used to talk about that. He was like, oh, right, you love your mother so much, right, that you'll stay alone like her. You're not choosing that. This isn't conscious,
Mhm.
but it's one of those dynamics that we see all the time.
Mm.
Yeah, that the way that children atone, merge, follow,
Repeat.
repeat, right? Express, right? It needs to be named, because when you're little, mom is source. She's everything. She is life. And you love her so much. Every baby, every child, you do anything. You need me to big mom? Right? And it takes away from your own development, and it starts to form who you are.
So that's a great segue into what happens in family constellation work when you've been given up for adoption, or, and please speak on both,
I will.
or you have to put your embryos into a surrogate to carry.
So here's what I know, the basic, like the whole surrogacy and exactly the impact of that. I mean, that's still being experienced. It's like new. But what's important is that everyone is included. So working with people who are adopted, they feel like they don't know anything about their parents. And no, you are your parents.
Meaning through the lineage?
Yes, you are your parents biologically, so they have to be included.
Even if you don't live with them, ever met them.
About, if I have you, if you're adopted, I would have you. So show me how it was. You, your biological mother, your biological father, your adopted mother, your adopted father. There will be a picture that just, right? They'll go, oh, they're here, did it.
Mm.
I worked with a Korean woman raised in a Jewish family, right? Of course, she picked these like bright colors for the footprints of her biological parents who she didn't know at all, and these sort of dark urban, these things just happen. But when she could stand as her mother or her biological family, even if we have no information, the energy shows up. Right? And when you get to include that and include the love and the hurt, the longing and the betrayal, right? Because every child feels like something's wrong with them if they're given away, right? When you get to include that, and then you have the bigger picture of, I couldn't feed you, whatever happened, and then you have everyone in the right order, your life changes. It's no different than yours.
Okay.
But you have to include everyone. So if it's like someone else's egg and a surrogate, like everyone involved in that child's birth should know this. The child should know the story, and everyone should be included in their like appropriate way.
Right. So we're here in LA. I imagine a world where the children that have come in through donated gametes, where they know that and they've integrated that. It's becoming so common where we need third party. So as the women who are accepting eggs from other women and then making an embryo with their husband's sperm and then gestating that child, how would you do that type of family constellation?
I've never actually put it up in the field. So I've never had anyone come that had that. But again, it would all be egg donor, mom, dad, right?
But
so
then,
now this child has like 3 parents or 3 contributors,
Right.
Because in systemic work, we call it family system, but actually included in your system is anyone that you have impacted in a life-changing way. So, for example, if you were married before, and then that didn't end well, or you just abandoned someone, that incomplete relationship can get expressed by one of your children in the new relationship, right? So you have to take care of, if you in a car accident hurt someone, that person's in your system forever, right? Everything needs to get resolved. We've done a lot of work with soldiers or people. You kill someone, they're in your system, and you are in theirs.
Wow, how do you do that?
Well,
I'm just curious. I mean, it's outside the context of baby making, but it's karma. And
yes.
We all feel like we are somehow causing our infertility or our subfertility. Somehow we've created it, which is a layer of consciousness and stuff, but reconciling
Yeah.
Whether I do it through grief work, but now I'm really going to be
Well,
thinking about this.
And real grief work is around actually letting yourself feel the loss that's sourced in love such that it can take you back into the flow of love.
Mm-hmm.
So in like anyone that we've worked with that has had stillbirths or abortions or miscarriages, we always include those. When you stand, right, and have all of the lives, even if they, right, if they didn't get born, but they were alive for a while, and you're the parent and you put them all down around you, you will feel different. You, if you're carrying them in grief or is not there, that costs your system. You're carrying that. So I would say to people who've been through this, the best thing that you can do is honor and include, plant a tree, put a crystal, any life, right, that you created but that didn't make it, you honor that life. And you, right, like in the natural world, there's zillions of eggs and how many actually live, and so many, like, so stay in what flows and honor what expressed to the extent that it did, that it will take you back into the health. And that's the kind of grief work that allows you, to include, not exclude.
Right. I had a story, she's a chapter in my book, of a woman who was carrying twins from an IUI. And she did a CVS, and an infection was introduced into her cervix. And a few weeks went by, and then she developed a severe infection, and she lost both of the babies. Well, she was approaching the shower, or had she had enough gifts and things. The nursery was coming together, and a whole year went by where she didn't open that door, and she thought that she was ready to conceive again, but her uterine lining would not proliferate. And I helped her to do traditional grief recovery work that led to writing a goodbye letter to the twins and having a service where she read that letter, and they honored those two, and they invited family members that wanted to participate. And lo and behold, after that, the uterine lining proliferated. She conceived. She delivered one healthy full-term baby girl. It really does make a difference. It's not magic. It's not miraculous. It's consciousness.
And it's going back to order, right? Belonging.
As following a logic.
So any life does not want to be carried forward as pain or loss or void. They want to be remembered in their right place, in a good way.
Joy,
and
potential.
I have represented people who have passed, and I can tell you from my body how really true that is. And you know, that whole survivor's guilt thing, right? It does no service to those who have passed. It doesn't let them rest in peace. Yeah. So
standing in as my grandfather, knowing that his parents were Holocaust survivors, and thinking about that pressure that he had on him to convert from Judaism to Catholicism for their safety, that to know that and to feel that very different, and to integrate, to help his granddaughter, me.
Yeah, we just did our last group constellation. The parents of a client really had lived through, the father had been hidden and lived through the Holocaust as a child. And I had everyone, right, those people are looking backwards, right? And there's this longing and there's this emptiness. And right, I had everyone at the workshop stand up. No, these are all of your relatives that lived.
Wow.
Right? You have to remember them as people who lived. Yes, they died. Yes, that has to be grieved, right? And remembered. But then you're here because they all lived,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're not here from a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
when you clear up that vacuum in people, it makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be true. It's like if you've had a miscarriage or something didn't work, right? You really need to complete that so, right, that doesn't get put on the next child, which can absolutely happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you exclude, someone else will unconsciously take on the feelings of the excluded party.
Mm-mm. Oops.
Yeah.
Well, so for the listeners out there, and as your episode will be out around Mother's Day for support, could you share some wisdom? You're such a wise woman. What would you want to land in the hearts of the women that are listening that have been hoping and praying for the gift of motherhood and that experience?
Look at your relationship with your mother, both conscious and unconscious. Are you taking care of her? Are you too close to her? Are you merged with her? Are you rejecting her? All of these ways that we're in a sort of an unresolved tension dynamic with our mothers matters.
Like an entanglement?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right. And if they do take a look at it and they realize something's up, well, of course it will be.
Yes.
But
and do some work around that. Do some family constellation. Like I don't have any other alternative to family constellation work in terms of, I mean, there's dealing with it and then what you know, but access what you don't know.
Mm-hmm. And
right?
I
Because
know
a lot
now.
of people, right, can say, oh, I love my mother. Da, da, da. They don't realize, right, that
Enmeshment.
they're too close.
Uh-huh.
They're too close. And it's not, that takes energy.
Mm-hmm.
If you're still in an emotional dynamic with one of your parents and you're not fully individuated, that takes energy from your system, right? And if you're trying to conceive and you want to flow to your own children, you got to receive from the back.
Yeah, from the back, meaning
your parents. Yeah, you got to receive and fill up, and that flows forward.
Right.